There are two kinds of Unitarians. Those who know they are and those who don't. And for those who know they are, there are two kinds of them. Those who join and those who don't. Many years ago, a survey was taken in the country about religious affiliation. And according to the statistics, though not the numbers, there were millions of Unitarians, people who identified when they had to make a choice, but we have a much smaller number because of that joining problem. Charles Dickens is a famous Unitarian, or at least we've decided that he was a Unitarian. He wrote a letter to a friend and said that he had decided that he was going to join the Unitarians because they tried to do something about the problems in the world rather than just pray over them. Anyway, I think there's a common set of ideals that we have as human beings that goes through all religions. All the religions, of course, have been invented in order to try to help us live a better life, a decent life, and make the world better. It's not that we've achieved all those things, it's just that we keep trying. One of my favorite statements in that regard is from the English teacher, Miller Williams, who's a poet, and he said, "Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What appears conceit, cynicism, or bad manners is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You do not know what wars are going on down there, where the spirit meets the bone." Scrooge reminds us of that person. Something is going on down there. And in Dickens' wonderful little story, we get an idea or an insight into some of the things that he has been dealing with that have caused him to become the person that he became, same as the rest of us. We have a history, we have influence, and we become who we become in part because of those influences. Scrooge was notorious for lacking a basic sense of compassion, and he changed. And that's the lesson that Charles Dickens offers in his wonderful little story. Perhaps it was his nephew Fred's little sermon. Do you remember that? When he met him on Christmas Eve. Thomas Wolfe said, "I have to see a thing 1,000 times before I see it once." I have to see a thing 1,000 times before I see it once. I feel that way about A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' story of Scrooge's transformation. There is, for example, a moment when Scrooge is responding to a request to contribute money to help the poor and destitute. And he mentions establishments that they could go to, and the gentleman who was asking for his contribution said, "Many cannot go there, and many would rather die." And then Scrooge replies, flippantly of course, "If they had rather die, then they had better do it and decrease the surplus population." And it seems like Scrooge is stunned by his own statement. And he stops in the middle of that statement and says, "Besides, I don't know that." And the gentleman who was collecting the funds said, "You might know it." That's a moment. And I'm going to share with you the words of Dickens. Every year I watch at least one of the films of A Christmas Carol. And I'm always a little frustrated because they don't use Dickens' words very much. They use the basic story, of course. But I want to share with you some of the language that Dickens used. And hopefully you will, as Thomas Wolfe said, see a thing 1,000 times and know it once. Dickens divides his little book into 5 chapters, but he calls them staves. It's a line, it's from music. It lines out those 5 lines to line out the music. And after all, he called his story A Christmas Carol. And so he calls the chapters in his book staves. And I'm going to read from stave 1 and stave 5 and leave the ghosts to you. In the introduction to his book, Dickens wrote, "I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it." In other words, don't lay it to rest. The story begins with Marley. The first word in the story is Marley. And I think that's interesting because Marley, it seems, is Scrooge's alter ego. And you'll pick up on that when you hear Dickens' words. So from stave 1. Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, the chief mourner, and Scrooge signed it. And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know myself what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I'm more of a mind to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmonger in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hand shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. Therefore, permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? For he and Marley were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and sole mourner. But even Scrooge was not so cut up by the sad event that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There's no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come from the story I'm about to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards. Scrooge and Marley's. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Some people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and some people called him Marley. But he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red and his thin lips blue. And he spoke out shrewdly in a grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and he didn't thaw at 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitter than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to happen. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely. Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the streets with gladsome looks and said, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him when it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs seemed to know him. And when they saw him coming on, they would tug their owners up doorways and into courts, as if they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did he care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, keeping all human sympathy at its distance. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller, it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle. And not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the moment, said "bah" again, and followed it up with humbug. "Don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be?" returned the uncle. "When I live in a world of fools such as this, Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stick of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle, "you keep Christmas in your way, now let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you, much good it has ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure that I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of other people bound on other journeys. And though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I say it has done me good and it will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible to the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another word from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "You're quite a powerful speaker," he said, turning toward the nephew. "It's a wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, he did. He went the whole length of the expression. And he said that he would see him in that place first. "But why?" said Scrooge, his uncle, nephew. "Why? Why did you get married?" "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if that were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give us a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I'm sorry with all my heart that you're so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last, so a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding, and he stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam." This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to the list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night." "Well, we have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting the credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, picking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir." "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are, still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor law, then? They're in full vigor?" said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid from what you said that they had stopped in their usual course," said Scrooge. "I'm glad to hear it." "Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude," returned the gentleman. "A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time, of all others, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing." "Oh, you wish to remain anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "If that's what you're asking me, since you asked, that's my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough. and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, then they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, said Scrooge. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived, and with an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. You'll want the whole day tomorrow, I suppose. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop a half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work? The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning his great coat to the chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down the slide at Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play a blind man's bluff. That's the end of stave 1, and you know what happens in staves 2, 3, and 4. Scrooge goes home, has his dinner alone, sees the face of Molly on the knocker on his door, which he had never seen before that way, and is visited by the ghost of Molly. Scrooge said to him, you know, how did this happen? He has all these chains, and he said, these are the chains I forged in life. And Scrooge said, but you were an excellent man of business. And Marley says, business? Humanity was my business. Charity, forbearance was my business. And so Scrooge meets the ghost of his past. It's sort of like psychoanalysis. He goes back and tells his childhood. And we see a little bit about what happened in his life. And we start to understand what wars are going on down there where the spirit meets the bone. We start to understand Scrooge, and interestingly, we have sympathy for him. We feel badly the way his life has turned out. And he sees the ghost of Christmas present, past, and future. And then he wakes up. Yes, the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three have strived within me. Oh, Jacob Marley. Heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so flooded and glowing with good intentions that his voice broke, and he could scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirits, and his face was wet with tears. I don't know what to do, said Scrooge, laughing, crying at the same time. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. Whoop! A Happy New Year to the world. Hello there. Whoop! Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. A most illustrious laugh. The father of a long line of many brilliant laughs to come. I don't know what day of the month it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello. Whoop. Hello there. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold. Cold for the piping of the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly skies, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious. What's today? Said Scrooge, calling down to a boy in his Sunday clothes, who perhaps was loitered about. Eh? Returned the boy with all his might of wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Today? Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Do you know the poulterers at the corner but one? I said, oh, I did. An intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that's hanging there? Not the little prize turkey, but the big one. What? The one as big as me? Oh, what a delightful boy, said Scrooge. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. Well, it's hanging there now. Is it? Said Scrooge. Go and buy it. Walker, exclaimed the boy. No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at the trigger who got a shot off half so fast. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hand and splitting with a laugh. He shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob from me. The hand with which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did. Somehow. And he went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting for the arrival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has on its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello. Hi, and Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon those legs, that bird. He would have snapped them short off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. Why, it's impossible for you to carry that to Camden Town, said Scrooge. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down, breathless in his chair again. And he chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much. And shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end off his nose, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets, and the people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them, with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest of all to his ears. He had not gone far when, coming towards him, he beheld a portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before, and said Scrooge and Molly's, I believe. It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both hands. "How do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Merry Christmas to you." "Mr. Scrooge?" "Yes," said Scrooge. "That is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you, but allow me to beg your pardon. And will you have the goodness..." And here he whispered in the man's ear. "Lord bless me," cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" "If you please," said Scrooge. "Not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?" "My dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, "I don't know what to say to such munificence." "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?" "I will," cried the gentleman. And it was clear he meant to. "Thank you," said Scrooge. "I'm much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you." He went to church, and he walked about the streets, and he watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head, and questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of houses, and looked up into the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. And in the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made the dash. He did it. "Is your master home, my dear?" said Scrooge. "Nice girl, very nice girl." "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" "He's in the dining room, along with his mistress. I'll show you up the stairs if you please." "Thank you, he knows me," said Scrooge with his hand ready on the dining room knob. "I'll go in there, my dear." Turn the knob gently, and sided his face in, round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points and like to see that everything is just right. "Bread?" said Scrooge. Dear heart, his niece by marriage was startled. "Why, bless my soul," cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" "Let him in? It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful unanimity, wonderful games, wonderful happiness." But he was early at his office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing his heart was set upon. And he did it, yes he did. Clock struck 9. No Bob. 9:15, no Bob. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open so he could see the clerk into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on the stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge, in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here late at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are," said Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, please." "It's only once a year," pleaded Bob, peering from the tank. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this thing any longer. And therefore, He continued leaping from his stool and giving Bob a dig in the waistcoat and staggered him back into the tank again. And therefore, Bob, I'm about to raise your salary. Bob trembled a little and got nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down and holding him, calling to the people in the court to get a straitjacket. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. And a Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary, and I'll endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we will discuss your affairs this afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, Scrooge was as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us everyone. Well, those are Dickens' words. Not many people read them. They watch the movie or see the stage play, which is fine, it gives the same message. But I think Dickens had a way with the language that I find missing otherwise. I read a review in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about a new book by Bob Berman called Zoom, How Everything Moves. And I bought it and I read it, and I was surprised to read this paragraph. The Scotsman, industrialist Andrew Carnegie, was easy to hate. While his workers lived from hand to mouth, unsuccessfully fighting their bosses' miserly pay cuts, Carnegie became the world's richest man. By the late 1800s, Carnegie Steel Company, later called United States Steel Corporation, propelled its tiny owner, exactly 5 feet tall, into a royal life in a Scottish castle. But everyone loves a converted tyrant, a sinner turned saint. And Carnegie did a 180 degrees turnabout, just as the century flipped from 19th to the 20th. In a series of newspaper articles, the robber baron outperforming even the metamorphosis of Dickens' Ebenezer Scrooge, started advocating abolition of war, free non-sectarian education, donating fantastic sums that ultimately totaled his entire fortune of $380 million, several billion in today's dollars. He established more than 3,000 free libraries, funded African American education, built concert venues. Carnegie Hall comes to mind. And in case you thought he was never headed towards science, he established a series of cutting-edge foundations. Alfred Nobel had the same experience. Maybe you know the story. True story. Alfred Nobel, of course, had made a fortune by developing what? Dynamite. And he was away on a trip when there was an accident in his place of business, and his brother was killed in the accident. And Alfred Nobel read an obituary that they had made a mistake and said it was Alfred who had died and not the brother. And when he read the obituary, his own obituary, he was shocked by the way he felt when he read it, because it called him the Dynamite King. And that's what he was known for, and for accumulating money. And so he decided to change. And he set up what we now know as the Nobel Prizes in several areas. The point is, it's possible to change. It's never too late. And the truth is, we all go through some of those times when we are not the kind of person that we want ourselves to be. And something has to happen. And so Scrooge's nephew, Fred, gave that little sermon. And the gentleman asking for donations for the poor and destitute touched something in him. We're affected by one another. It matters. It matters how we are with one another. I'm going to end with a favorite little poem by E.E. Cummings. Perhaps you know that E.E. Cummings' father was a Unitarian minister in Boston. Cummings had his own ministry through poetry mostly. This for the season. Little tree, little silent Christmas tree. You're so little you're more like a flower. Who found you in the green forest? And were you very sorry to come away? See, I will comfort you, because you smell so sweetly. I will kiss your cool bark and hug you safe and tight, just as your mother would, only don't be afraid. Look at the spangles that sleep all year in a dark box, dreaming of being taken out and allowed to shine. The balls, the chains, red and gold and fluffy threads. Put up your little arms, and I'll give them all to you to hold. Every finger shall have its ring, and there won't be a single place dark or unhappy. And then when you're quite dressed, you'll stand in the window for everyone to see, and how they'll stare. Oh, but you'll be very proud. And my little sister and I will take hands, and looking up at our beautiful tree, we'll dance and sing Noel.